Okay, so let us do a quick Goodreads summary of The Light of All That Falls. This will be very, very light spoilers, just the Goodreads summary. It says, The Light of All That Falls concludes the epic adventure that began in the shadow of what was lost, the acclaimed fantasy blockbuster from James Islington. The boundary is whole once again, but it may be too late. Banes now stalk Andara, and while Elenalan, the political machinations of a generation come to a head as Wyr's newfound ability forces his family's old enemies into action. Imprisoned and alone in a strange land, Davian is pitted against the remaining Venerate as they work tirelessly to undo Asha's sacrifice, even as he struggles to deal with what he has learned about the friend he chose to set free. And Caden, now facing the consequences of his centuries-old plan, must finally confront its reality, heartbroken at how it began and devastated by how it must. Okay. Also, some good things to know is that it has a 4.49 rating on Goodreads. Goodreads just fell below 4.5, but it only has 1,362 ratings and 142 reviews. Stephen, I believe you have something to say about this rating?
Yeah, fake news from Goodreads. So I believe this to be a case of early reader bias, where the early results that are coming in, early ballots, if you will, are from big fans of the series. And so obviously they're going to read first and like it the most. We can get into this more, but I'm going to just tell you up front, I was not a huge fan of the last book in this series, and I expect that number to go down.
Okay. All right. A good hot take to start us with. So we'll jump in and do just our typical content rating. By now, you should be pretty aware of what's in this book series. There is some violence. It doesn't necessarily shy away from that. However, I would not classify this as grimdark. There's nothing more in this book than what's been in other books. There's no real swears or no real sex or other content.
Wheel of Time level stuff, right? Like, I think that series set a pretty good benchmark for what you see in a lot of epic fantasy. So pretty, TV 14-ish.
Yeah, definitely. And again, if you've read the first two, you're not going to see anything in here that is going to shock you. So it's pretty light. I think that this could, that readers of most ages that are able to get through the book are probably okay to read it. I mean, that's a value judgment that parents can make, but it's pretty light on most content. Okay. Ryan, do you want to give us maybe a bit more context of how this book is starting, kind of where things from book 2 left off?
Yeah, so if you'll remember at the end of book 2, Davian is stuck behind the Ilshara with Fessy. Fessy just disappeared. I guess they're trapped in a city, Ilshan Gath Delteth, I believe it's called. She finds an opportunity to escape, so she leaves Davian behind. Davian finds Caden currently being tortured by a member of the Venerate.
It's Meldier, right?
Meldier, yes, Meldier is correct. And Davian tells him to Caden tells Davian to set him free by chopping off his head, which Davian does, which sets Caden free. Weir, on the other hand, is on the other side of the Ilshara. They were just attacked by those drone I'm blanking on the name, those drone like warrior creatures that were attacking, and him, Caroline, and what's that girl's name?
Ishel
are the only survivors, and they find out that those creatures kind of infect humans, and if the bodies aren't burned, they will turn into the drone-like creatures, kind of like a zombie type thing or vampire. I don't know. What am I missing?
So they're the Elatai. That's the name
Elatai.
of the
Elatai. Got it.
I believe the only thing that you're really missing was where Asha left off. She can have had just sacrificed herself to provide her life force to kind of maintain the boundary and enter in.
She has the tributaries are attached, or she climbs into a tributary, and she has the all of the power of the shadows as well as the Lith, and she is using that power to reinforce the Ilshara.
And then the book ends with Caden waking up back at the wells, and he just has a vision reminding him that he killed Davian, back maybe, 50 years ago or so, kind of back when he got set on the path to realizing that Shemeloth was really El in disguise and all that. So he realizes that he was the one that killed Davian, and then this is going to really kind of play into the plot of...
I actually think it was thousands of years, or 1,000 years in the past, because it was right after Davian as Archon of Vade storms into that the city with the Deresians, and the Deresians try and activate their weapon to travel through time, and it kind of fails, and that's how they're turned into the Lith. And then as after Caden helps save or transports them to that area where they'll be safe, he comes back out, and Davian's there and accuses him of all of these awful things, chops off Davian's head and mounts it on a pike.
Could be true. So somewhere between 50 and thousands of years ago. The timeline is really convoluted.
And so that kind of gets into what I think might be one of the weaker things of this, and this is still kind of generally no spoilers, is that there's a lot of grand timelines going on here, but you don't really know if something was 50 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And I mean, I'm sure people do, but as a kind of casual reader that doesn't like study this out, it's kind of hard to keep track of.
It is sometimes a little bit hard, just with so many different periods of time and flashbacks, to keep them straight. Yeah.
I would say in comparison to, I mean, we compare to Sanderson a lot, but he's such a great comparison benchmark. He does a really great job of, in his series, is providing enough detail where a reader who is really into all the details and into the Cosmere and all those things would really get behind all these details and love all these new things. But then a casual reader could also just kind of gloss over some of the details, but still get all the main pieces of the story. But I feel like maybe not the case as much here, because if you're not picking up on how the timeline is coming together exactly right, then some things are just not quite going to make sense, and you're just going to be kind of accepting things that are happening. I don't know exactly how the Licanius Trilogy could have improved in this, because it's obviously a really tricky thing to do. But I feel like maybe some more hints or clues or more surface level things to try to allow for a really in-depth timeline, and also a timeline that allows for a more casual reader to be fine with.
So I want to read, I read a few reviews in preparation for this, and there's this review by Kirkus Review. It's one of the first ones that pop up, but it says, what with the unflagging pace, so many moving parts, and so much intricate, lavish, and sometimes intimidating detail, it's not impossible to ascertain whether it all adds up. What matters is the author's unshakable conviction that it does, a conviction that eventually we come to share, if only by osmosis. And I think that's a good, I kind of take it by faith that if I were to go study all these things, piece it all together, that would make more sense than it does. But at the same time, I'm pretty well versed in fantasy, and I've read a lot of fantasy series, and I still kind of struggle.
Yeah, I figure if we are struggling, even in this podcast, to piece things together, maybe not the greatest sign, right?
It didn't really negatively affect my read through of it, though. I think it was something that I easily set aside, and I was able to enjoy the book regardless of that.
But do you think that plot essential things like that are things you should just set aside? Like, I feel like I would like, as a reader, to really understand exactly how all the pieces are coming together.
Yeah, I think that's true. I guess that there are different levels of depth which people read. There are some people who truly read to understand every little part of the universe, the world, the magic system, the politics, and there are some people that just kind of read to kind of have a surface level escape, don't need to get every little detail nailed down, but just kind of ride along with the author.
Okay, so let's go over some quick overall impressions, and then we can get into some spoiler talk, because I feel like some of these discussions might be a little bit better if we can talk about specific spoilers. So I'll start with my overall impression. I thought that this book, was the weakest of the three, honestly. I was really excited going into it, and I wasn't completely disappointed, but I was a little bit let down with the pacing and kind of something. Let's go with you next, Stephen.
Very disappointed. Not as disappointed as, for example, like the Bloodsong trilogy, which just tapered off into nothing by the end of it. But I'm going to say, I mean, this is like a 2.5 to 3 stars out of 5 for me. I really liked the first 2 books in the series. I thought it was going in a really strong direction and had a lot of potential for a nice conclusion. But honestly, I thought this book was boring. I thought a lot of the characters were just kind of sitting around doing nothing and chatting. And a lot of I think he was trying to hit at some hard themes that, I mean, in principle, there are some interesting ideas, but they just never really landed for me because I stopped caring about the story and I stopped caring about the characters. It's tough to really ascertain exactly where this went wrong, but I just feel like in bits and pieces, the story kind of fell apart for me.
Yeah, I too loved the first 2 books, and going into the third book, I was looking forward to a lot, and I think the author James Islington, I'm pretty sure that is the correct pronunciation, Stephen. I would just like to concede defeat from the second book podcast where I thought it was Islington. Anyways, I think that James Islington tied up most of the loose ends, but not necessarily in a way that I was expecting. I just didn't have the same feeling of epicness as I was reading this book as in the first 2 books. That being said, I did enjoy it probably a bit more than both of you guys did, but it didn't quite live up to what I wanted.
I think that a good summary of it is that James Islington is a lot better at asking questions than he is at answering questions in a satisfactory way. At least with a lot of the conclusions to things that we got, they weren't quite as satisfying as I would hope they would be.
The more fantasy I've read, the more I realize that it's really hard to close out series. Even in a series like Lightbringer, which we all just read, which I felt was a fairly good ending, still was not necessarily the greatest. We had some issues with it. I can't think of a series that was really closed out in a way that I absolutely loved. So I would agree with you, Josh. In general, I think it's a lot easier to ask questions than to answer.
Okay, well, that might be a good thing that you can tweet at us or comment us as some series that you think have the best endings. Okay, so let's move on to some spoiler talk. So if you have not read the book, I'm still going to recommend that if you've read the first 2 that you read this book, because I think it was the weakest of the 3. I still think that you should.
Agreed. It's worth knowing what happens.
Okay, so let's jump into some spoilers. Let's do a light discussion about the premise of this book, because I don't think that things changed too much about it.
No, the premise is what you've seen in the previous 2 books, and he does really well in wrapping up all the loose ends and explaining what happens. I didn't love what his explanations were, but as far as what the premise was, yeah, it fulfilled what it was trying to get at after.
And I think throughout the whole series, the main question of, which isn't very subtle, is fate versus free will. That's sort of what everybody's fighting for. The Venerate they're performing a lot of good and a lot of evil in the hopes that they can break free of this predestined path into a place where they're able to actually make decisions that change course. And the third book continues that to try and answer that question.
So another part of the premise that I was disappointed in was the conflict between El, and here's a little trivia question, was the name of the kind of evil spirit. Shemeloth. Perfect. So the conflict between El and Shemeloth was just nothing interesting happened with it. Like, we kind of got the reveal early on in book 2 that Shemeloth was actually not El and was evil. And then I was kind of hoping that they would do something more interesting with it. There's going to be some spoilers for Mistborn for the next little bit, so you might want to put on mute for a little bit.
Mistborn Trilogy 1, I'm assuming.
Yeah, Mistborn Trilogy 1 I feel like that was really cool with kind of how preservation and ruin worked together and came and had to combine in order to make the world a better place. Sanderson kind of dealt with those themes in a really interesting way, whereas I felt like this was like, oh, here's a twist that the god that Caden was following all along, or Talcamara was following all along, wasn't actually the real god, and then that's it. That's what we got.
Yeah, I completely agree. I felt like there was room for twists, but they never really happened, right? I mean, were there any real twists or aha moments? I mean, I guess at the end a little bit, but even with we're doing full spoilers, right?
Right.
Yeah, full spoilers.
Yeah, so even with Davian's parentage at the end, and with the reveal that Caden actually morphed into Davian, and he was the one who basically killed himself. Even with those reveals, I felt like rather than big aha moments, they were more like, oh, okay, that's how it happened, right? Like not huge plot impactful things, more just, oh, okay, this is the wrapping up of the loop.
Yeah, like even with Caden morphing into Davian, you guys had both already finished the book when I was reading it, and I texted you guys, oh, this is what I think is going to happen and how it's going to happen, and it happened.
Hey, to be fair, you said that at like chapter 49, which was right at the end of the book, right?
Yeah, it was right then. It was when they were kind of having the last battle, but it wasn't. It was leading up to it, but he hadn't already like left into the, so it was. But to your point, it just wasn't that surprising. Like that wasn't. It was very predictable.
The only thing that wasn't necessarily predictable that I can think of off the top of my head is Davian's origins, and that's mainly because we weren't really introduced to his parents at all, so there was no way you could predict them before this book. But that was a little bit of a surprise, I guess.
I'm a little conflicted on that. So I did not like the whole Zavalar thing. I felt like it went on for a long time. There was a lot of just chatting between him and Rayleigh. And I never understood the point of it. So as I was reading, I was like, what is the point of this? What is the point of this? What is the point of this? And maybe that's bad on me for not, not getting into the journey of the thing rather than the ultimate destination. But at the same time, it's like, I want to have my questions answered. This is a very long book, so I'd like to see the plot moving forward, but I never got any satisfaction from that. So at the end, seeing that those were actually his parents was satisfying, but I don't know if it really excuses just the boredom of the whole time that he was there. What do you guys think?
I thought Zvalar was boring when he first got there, but after he got to the tower, he learned that Talcamar was in Zvalar. I thought that it became a lot more interesting, but I agree that when they were just kind of wandering around looking for metal, I was kind of like, what's the point of this? When's this gonna move on?
Yeah, I kind of feel like that was and I think we were talking about this too, but that was not a good thing to put in book 3. I feel like if that would have been a thing that they went on in book 2, and that Davian went to Zavalar in book 2 somehow and had that journey, and maybe that's how he got good at using Khan, that would have been a little bit better. But I was like, why are we spending so many pages and such a big chunk of this book in the setting and with characters that we haven't been introduced to before, when there's still so much that we do care about? And then I feel like because of that, he kind of let a lot of side characters and even characters that we do really care about, like and Asha, not get as much screen time as I'd have liked.
Or someone like Caroline get zero.
Yeah,
absolutely zero.
I thought that I wasn't totally sold on the Caroline was Nethgola theory, but I thought that it would have played out in a different way, the fact that Nethgola was Caroline the whole time, or at least most of the time. I thought that was kind of another little bit of a letdown, that it just at the end they're like, oh yeah, and Nethgola was Caroline.
Yeah, it kind of felt like one of those things where more people liked Caroline's character than he thought were going to, and he, maybe between books he was like, oh, I need to figure out how I'm getting this character and it's satisfying, and then so he was like, oh, I don't know, it was weird.
Honestly, it seems like before finishing book 3, he read all of the Reddit threads about the series, made a list of all of the theories and loose ends and issues that people had with the series, and then went through like ticking them all off. Like, okay, got to explain this, got to explain this, got to explain this. Here's all these theories that people have, got to choose one of them. Like, I don't know. Did you guys feel like that at all?
Yeah, like I said, I thought that he did a good job at answering at answering the questions, but not necessarily a good job at the answers he used for those questions, if that makes sense.
Well, which is again kind of sad, because sometimes you don't need to answer everything. Sometimes you can leave it kind of open, even if you're not planning on writing another series in the book. Sometimes you can kind of leave it for the reader to interpret some things instead of just giving lame answers.
One of the lamer answers was, I think, Fessy, right? So
yeah,
he had the augurs see their deaths in the second book. Was the second, or maybe even the first book? Anyway, so he set that up, and that's fine. Like, I like how he set it up, and I like that what he had set up actually happened. But at the same time, I feel like there's room to to twist things around and answer the questions in unexpected ways. So when you have Fessy run off and then someone just tells Davian, oh, Fessy died, and then that's ultimately what happens. It's totally off camera. She's somewhat of a main side character and she's just gone. I mean, disappointing.
The only thing is with Fessy, they kind of used that. They hid the way that she died a little bit to surprise you later with Cassandra, kind of using her as one of his proxies. But then Davian kills Fessy within the same scene of actually seeing the Cassandra Fessy proxy.
So I think something that might be kind of indicative of these questions is I felt like I missed a lot of these answers, or I felt like I kind of read it too fast or just missed some things, and that's why I didn't enjoy it as much. And then so I kind of went on Reddit to look for some of these answers, and it was just that's what they were. Like I already had read everything and understood, not everything, but most things that I thought I didn't understand. Like, for example, another one was with the champion in the ring that he went to fight and stabbed himself. We never got like a really good answer to that question. And I was like, oh, I just must have missed that because I was reading it too quick. And no, it's just we didn't really get a great explanation of it.
Well, I mean, I guess that's an example of one that wasn't actually answered. But yeah,
I
Brian
think it was kind of hinted at when Weir sees Aelric again at the end, and they're parting. I think Aelric says something to Weir like, tell Davian he needs to work on his forms or something like that. And I think that was kind of implying that somehow Aelric had something to do with that. Oh, and where Davian thought that guy in the arena fought kind of similarly to Aelric. And then later we see Aelric controls a suit of armor to destroy that pillar. I think the theory that I kind of have, that other people have as well, is that Aelric was somehow controlling that guy in the arena and then had him kill himself at the end of the battle. But that's something you could easily have missed.
Yeah, so that makes sense, and I like that explanation, but was that something that was left purposefully vague, or was that something that he just thought people would pick up on? I just don't really understand why a character that we literally know nothing about, you have to kind of have a whole theory explaining death.
What did you guys think about Aelric and Dietzia's little side adventure that was never explained, and then they came in at the end and kind of saved the day with whatever alliance they'd formed with Ness? I know that Eilington said that he actually wants to write another story about their whole adventure, and the reason why he didn't include that in this book was just because of length. But I don't know. I felt like it could have been hinted at a little more, and honestly, I never really got the point of the characters in the first place. But
I think that if he was planning on writing and expounding their story, I think he probably should have done it before book 3, maybe kind of as like a book 2.5 type thing to get people ready, where he kind of carries their story a little bit, and then once you start book 3, you know basically what has happened to Aelric and Dietzia.
I like that suggestion, like a novella, kind of like Edge Dancer in between Stormlights 2 and 3.
Yeah, exactly.
As it was just totally a little Deus. How do you say that? Deus ex machina.
Yeah, Deus ex machina.
Yeah, it was just Weir is screwed. Like he's gonna die. Oh wait, no. Of course he didn't. He's okay.
But I mean, I feel like with how Eilington killed off characters so matter-of-factly, it wouldn't have really been that much of a surprise if Weir had died at that point.
But I think it would have risen the stakes. Like as it was, I didn't actually think that Davian was going to march to his death, even though we saw him marching to his death, because there were so many, like our core 3 characters or 4 characters, if you count Caden, just like never had major terrible things happen to him. Like I never believed any of them were going to die.
Yeah, main characters never in danger. Side characters killed off camera indiscriminately. That's, I guess, the formula. I mean, I'm fine with the main characters not having bad things happening to them. That was the level of his writing a little bit, right? Like it wasn't a Song of Ice and Fire or anything more grim dark. But there, you can still have a sense of raised stakes, and I never really got all that much at risk of going wrong.
Yeah, and I think that kind of led to being a little bit like when people did die, it just wasn't very emotional for me. I didn't feel a lot of sorrow like the same. I remember reading the Red Wedding and Game of Thrones, and it's like literally you just like feel it in your stomach. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. Oh my gosh, like, this is happening just over and over again. How could this get worse? And I think like he didn't necessarily make you feel the stakes very much, and then when bad things did happen, you were just kind of maybe a little bit baffled. Like, did that actually happen?
Or they happened off camera, so you didn't even really get to experience that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about plot, we've talked about characters. Do you have anything? Is anything really added to the setting / world that he's built?
Will Zavelar was added, but I didn't like it.
Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say like they do expand a little bit on the Venerates background, like Cassandrid. You kind of learn a little bit more about him.
You see some more magic. You see Davian storing Khan vessels inside his body, which actually I thought that was done really well. That was something that was hinted at in the second book, and I think we actually said something briefly about it in our second podcast. So I was kind of pleased to see that come to fruition. And I thought it was cool that, that was kind of Davian's advantage, and that was the reason why he did a source. And that whole line of, killing Davian as a child and then being able to morph into him, and then Davian having these extra powers because he didn't have a source. Like, I thought that was really well done.
Although they didn't really answer the question of how exactly Caden could morph into Davian.
Well, I thought it was implied that because he took his source when he was in the womb, that's how he was able to get that imprint.
Oh,
yeah, agreed. I think that's
okay. I totally missed that.
Well, it was never stated, but they had a discussion early on with Nagala that he was talking to, where she was kind of teaching him how to make that. Was that when they had that conversation about?
I know they clarified the fact that you have to have killed someone in order to shapeshift into them. That was probably around the time when Davian was realizing that the person he shapeshifted into in the first book was one of his original tormentors. Another thing that I thought was lame, by the way, like that was a question that all three of us had been wondering about for the entirety of the first and second books. And then it was just kind of written off in some, oh, it's exactly what you thought it was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Pacing. I think we've already talked about how Zavelar, I think, kind of messed up most of the pacing for me, because usually I've been a big Davian fan and I've really enjoyed his viewpoint, and then that just kind of, I don't know, I did not enjoy the Zavelar parts.
I know the first two books there was so much happening and they were traveling around, and the second book may be a little different, but in the second book you had the fast action of all of Caden's memories returning so fast, and I thought it was interspersed with the events of present day really well. But in this book it was like, yeah, there was no real flow, I felt, throughout the whole.
I didn't really care about much until the last half or the last quarter of the book.
Yeah, fair enough. Steven, prose.
Hated the prose. Man, the prose. Okay, I have some things to say about the prose. So this has been a weakness for both books, right? But I think we've, I don't know, endured it or just ignored it or just kind of silently laughed about it. But at this point, I cannot let it go unsaid any longer. The prose is not good. It's the show. Okay, the worst thing is the lack of show don't tell writing, right? So there is so many times where he uses adverbs in really bad ways. So rather than explaining how someone is doing something or like showing the action, he'll just use an adverb to say how someone said something or how they acted. And that's just really like elementary bad writing. It's not engaging to read, and it doesn't allow you to really form a picture of what's going on. His word choice is, well, it's good in terms of he has a good lexicon of words to draw upon, but I don't know why he goes back to the same standard set of wordings over and over again. In this book, he loves the word vacillating. If anyone's ever indecisive about something, they are always vacillating. We know that people like to incline their heads when they respond affirmatively. Although, in fact, in this book, he did cut down on that. So maybe he heard our podcast and cut some of that out.
And everything went black.
Yeah, he loves to end scenes as things go black. Ryan, you've said before that he likes to always put people into companionable silences.
Yeah, they had a companionable silences. Right? They walked in a companionable way.
He also uses present participles way too much, which is like words ending in ing. So sentences will start with like an action word where the sentence structure is just weird to the point where it lends to passive voice. And so it's just hard to get into. And I feel like you don't necessarily always notice these things, but I don't know. I've read enough where it just really started to bug me.
Okay, so you're not wrong, but it never bugged me that much, and maybe that's because I was listening to it. So I read the first two and listened to the third, and maybe that's why it didn't bug me as much, because it was just I was hearing it read to me. This is a first-time author. Like, this is his third book that he's written.
Yeah, so after that rant's over, I'll say I feel bad about basically everything I said because he's a published author and he's a really good writer, better than anything that I've produced, right? So who am I to criticize? However, as a published author, I feel like maybe the editor is the one to blame because
That's what I was
why is the
thinking.
editor not catching more of these things? Because for me, they're fairly obvious. Like I feel like I could edit this book and improve it.
Yeah. And I was just going to say that I just read The Poppy War, and that was also a first book, but I felt like that was given resources that this book was not given. And, maybe rightfully so, because that book was maybe more important culturally than this book has been. But I agree that I think that, especially because this was picked up by, the first one was self-published, right?
It was like a small Australian publisher, and then Orbit picked up the second two.
Yeah. So come on, I mean, Orbit's a big publisher. So why didn't they give this a little bit more resources?
It's a big publisher, and they made a big social media push when this book came out. It was all over my Twitter, like the book's coming out. So yeah, you'd think that they would give it some resources in editing. It's not like, is editing a big resource to give a book? I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or maybe he didn't have as many rounds of like alpha readers or beta readers.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. It was kind of confusing because I feel like this almost maybe it's just we all started being more critical of it because we knew we were doing this, podcast. So maybe we were paying more attention to that than we were with the first two books. But I feel like it was it almost went down. Maybe he spent more time writing and revising the first one, and then had to produce these second two more quickly.
I spoke pretty glowingly about the second one, I believe. I really enjoyed the second one.
Yeah, I agreed. I like the second one quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. That wasn't meant to be a dig on the second one. I'm just trying to think of why the quality, why our perceptions of the editing and the word choice and the prose all kind of suffered more in this one than the other two.
I think for me, once a book starts to bug me, I get really nitpicky.
Yeah. So even
all starts to fall apart for me in my criticism.
Even you guys were joking about the incline their head thing, and then it popped up in the Poppy War, and then for a second I was like, wait, that's not good. But I think it only happened once, but it still bugged me because you guys were just talking about how much it bugged you. Okay, so let's get to depth. This book series has a lot of depth, or at least it seems like it has a lot of depth. What happened in this book with?
I think I mentioned this in the second book, but this series is kind of interesting where there's so much depth, but at the same time, it can also be really shallow. And an example of that is like the magic system. So there are a lot of rules to the magic system, and there's a lot of things that you see happen, but it's also kind of shallow in that you don't see things happen all that much with the magic. I guess another example would be just the timeline and the character depth. So you get a sense of this really expansive timeline and the years of things happening with Caden, but it can be really shallow for other characters. I might be rambling here, but I don't know. I'm just a little out of sorts with the depth of.
I think the best way to phrase it is like a mile wide, an inch deep kind of thing, where there's a lot, but there's not necessarily you can't dig very far. And I've been reading this series concurrently with Malazan, Book of the Fallen, the 10-book series by Steven Erikson. And it's kind of like that book has infinitely more depth than this. I'm constantly I feel like he's just kind of skimming across the surface. But if I pause at any moment and I try and dig down, I'll just go into a black hole. And I think that it's some people don't necessarily like as much depth, And I think that I really enjoyed the first books, even though there wasn't as much depth. There was so much happening that I didn't really think that much about it.
I feel like this book kind of had been relying on depth to make you super super interested and to bring you in that next level. And then this book with not getting the answers that I wanted from it, like with the depth really not coming into play, I guess. Like there's nothing resolved or answered because something was pulled from, from the depths of the lore. So I feel like if some answer or some problem was solved by like, oh, this was mentioned back then it would have felt like it was more important to have all these timelines and all this kind of added information.
I like that point, Josh. We need to maybe read more authors, but once again, Sanderson does a really great job of that, where he's got a ton of depth, but the depth matters. The things that he spends a lot of time with the legendary figures and magic and history, that matters. You're really interested in what happened with when the heralds broke the oath pact and when the desolations came and all these things that are in the history of the world, and you get a sense of, but those things are going to matter.
Yeah, they already have started to matter. So another thing, Ryan, when you said it's kind of a mile wide and an inch deep, I thought that was a really good description of it. You compare it to something like The Lord of the Rings, which is kind of the opposite, where the page count of that is not that, it's not that long, but everything is so deep and everything matters so much, and all the lore, you can just go, miles down. And I feel like this just needed a little bit more of a reason for the depth, or instead of just expanding it.
Like, I wanted to hear more about the Venerate. The Venerate were really interesting, but they didn't get a whole lot of time on camera.
So my biggest complaint with the Wheel of Time series is how the Forsaken are treated, and how sometimes they're just like don't really matter or are way weaker than you think that they should be, or I don't know, just the whole that's time for another discussion. But Forsaken kind of bugged me in the Wheel of Time. I feel like this was just done with the Venerate, only way, way, way worse than the Forsaken were in the Wheel of Time.
Yeah, because at least with the Wheel of Time, you get to see the Forsaken like sitting around their fireplace in their plush armchairs plotting, and those scenes are kind of fun.
And then this one is like, oh, I'll just kill another Venerate with Licanius as I move on down, and Caden's like has a tear streaming down his face as he does it, but are you ever thinking he's not going to do it?
Yeah, didn't it just seem like a checklist? Like, okay, check, we got this one, we got this one, we got this one. Okay, we checked them all off.
Yeah,
okay.
A little bit.
Epicness. Ryan, let's have you start on this one.
Well, I think I said it in the beginning where he answered pretty much all of the questions, but none of the answers really gave me the same sense of epicness of the other books. You never have those feelings of awe as the answer just kind of dawns on you and you realize, oh my gosh, it was there in front of me the whole time. That's so crazy. It was just kind of like it happened pretty much the way that Caden and those other members of the Venerate who broke off, kind of the way they had planned it, right? They initially thought, well, we're going to take Licanius and we're going to go kill all of the members of the Venerate and all of the augurs and then kill ourselves. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. I thought they were going to find some other way to do it that also made sense, but the answers that it was there the whole time, and we knew it was there, and we saw it, and that's how it was.
So something that bugged me a lot is that Caden said over and over, like, oh yeah, we have to kill all the augurs, and that was in the back of my mind always going to be like, holy cow, are we going to see Caden kind of back his arcane divad, where he's going to do something because it has to be done? And then no, it was just kind of like all the augurs just kind of died naturally, and then when it came to Caden, it was, oh, he's got this little MacGuffin that's going to save him.
Yes, there could have been room for some good character conflict and really test of growth, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah. So series as a whole, I think that this is still a worthwhile read. It's not going to be, I would not recommend it to anyone as their introduction into high fantasy or epic fantasy. I think that there's a lot of series that you should read before this one. However, I do think that this is a promising start for James. How did you say it, Ryan? What's the final?
Islington.
For James Islington. I think that this is a promising start. And I think that with maybe better editing and maybe a little bit more trust and time or more pages, I think that he's an author I'm going to definitely want to keep my eye on, and I'm planning on reading what puts out.
Yeah, he's already started on his next series, and like you said, with the better editor and some more books under his belt, I definitely plan on reading more of what he's going to write. Like Brent Weeks, the Night Angel trilogy was not nearly as strong as Lightbringer, and Sanderson's early stuff was not as strong as Stormlight. So, this is definitely not a turnoff to the author. And like I said, I am impressed with what he's put out, especially as a first-time author. I have some aspirational dreams one day to write, and I hope to produce something this strong in my first.
Yeah, I probably have a bit more of a positive than you guys. I loved the first two books, and the third book was all right to me. And so I would definitely recommend this series to everybody, with maybe a small caveat that it doesn't have as strong of a finish as it started with, but it also won't discourage me from continuing to read James Islington in the future. I think he's going to just continue to improve as he goes, or to seeing rights.
So yeah, I think I came off as a little bit more negative too on the series in that last comment. I really like the series, and for a while I was like, dang, this is going to be in my top 10, maybe even top 5 series. And I think with this third book, it's definitely not going to be top 5, and I'll have to maybe sit down and make a list. But I think that I was kind of disappointed by this book in that regard, that it kind of pushed it out of being top contenders on that list. But I still think that this is a series I would recommend. If someone's like, oh, what should I read next, and they've already read kind of a lot of the genre, I would
probably give the final book, The Light of All That Falls, maybe a 7 out of 10, 6.5 to 7, and then I would give the series as a whole an 8 to an 8.5.
Stephen?
Light of All That Falls, 6 out of 10. Trilogy, 7.5.
Okay, I think I'm right in there with you. I think that this book, 6 out of 10, maybe 5, 6 out of 10, and series as a whole, 8. So
let's end on a positive note. Josh, can we just go through like our favorite scene from the book and favorite character?
Yeah, let's do favorite scene. My favorite scene was, I think the very last scene where we find out Davian's parents. And sorry, we didn't talk about this before, so I hope I didn't steal any of your guys' favorite scenes. But I feel like that was where I felt that everything in Zavalar actually mattered, and where I felt like it was an intimate moment that we got to experience with Davian when we didn't really get many of those moments.
I think it would be cool too to go back and read those parts, knowing that Rayleigh was his father. I think that might be a little stronger.
Do you think that Rayleigh knew?
No.
I don't know that there's anything to indicate that he did.
Yeah, I don't know either. But, Rayleigh was wise, and I don't know, maybe he had a sense of it. I don't know.
So what about your favorite character, Josh?
My favorite character, I think Caden still in this book. He's been my favorite throughout the series, and I think he would stay my favorite in this book.
Yeah, I would agree. Caden has the coolest story, I think. Just back and forth, good and bad, but he's always trying to do the right thing. And I think my favorite scene was at the end of book 3, when he goes back in time and he sees his wife Eliavia before she is killed, and he's able to kind of talk to her, and I can't remember exactly what they say, but basically I think she kind of tells him, I know you're good, and I know you'll do the right thing.
I really like that scene, because I think it would have been a cop-out for him to go back to the wedding and try and change it and then not be able to.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a tempting thing to do as an author, and instead going back and giving him this intimate moment where he kind of comes to grips with himself and all of his action. That was nice.
Quick question before I say mine. Did we ever find out why Eliavia was killed at the wedding? Like why the priest killed her?
I don't think we did. If I had to guess, though, I would say that it was Shemaloth exerting some influence, because if the priest, like if you remember when Caden is going to kill the priest he's saying that it wasn't him, and I think that Shemaloth was exerting some sort of influence and probably did that to set Caden down a path in which he could hold more influence on him.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy that. I was interested. So, yeah, I don't have a different favorite scene. That was also my favorite scene, and I can't come up with another one right now. So, yeah, I agree with what you guys said. I thought that scene where he goes back and visits Eliavia was really awesome and really kind of tied up his arc really well. Favorite character, Caden was great. Let's see, I liked Asha quite a bit. I thought he did. I think did a good job of writing. A strong female protagonist, and Asha was a cool character. Also liked Caroline. Totally had a crush on her in the first 2 books, but I was disappointed that she didn't get any screen time at all, and that she was just being controlled the whole time. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you for tuning into another episode of Phantology. Please tweet at us maybe your favorite scene and favorite character from this book. Maybe give a little spoiler warning so that people don't accidentally stumble upon spoilers, as this is still a relatively new book. Thank you for tuning in.
Peace.
Thanks.